Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Max Verstappen has revealed the two key areas of improvement the RB20 is being designed to deliver, as Red Bull say that certain elements of last year's absolutely all-conquering RB19 car weren't even that good in the grand scheme of things, and they think they can do significantly better with its follow-on car, the RB20. Will they deliver on this? If they do, is it already over for the competition this season? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Firstly, rumour has it that Ferrari are due to announce the contract extensions of Leclerc and Sainz over the coming weeks. As it says here, Ferrari will announce in the coming weeks the renewal of Leclerc and Sainz. The delays beyond, Vasseur talked about this, apparently due to, duration of the contracts and remuneration, right? So money at the end of the day is what it comes down to. But certainly this contract duration is pretty interesting because Leclerc, we think, is going to get a longer term deal than Sainz is, and Sainz might not be so happy about that. But this source says that, well, the negotiations, normal negotiations with each party trying to push forward their own position. Also, big talking point today, though, on the top 10 drivers in 2023. So we saw yesterday what the drivers had to say on this. Now, we saw today what the team principals had to say on this. So this was the drivers one we saw yesterday. Relatively uncontroversial, I would say, until you get down to like number 10, really, with, Perez being 10th. Now, to be fair, if you're Perez, you've just got second in the championship, and your colleagues, your peers are voting you outside of the top 10, it ain't really a good sign, but, I would say that was probably justified. But in the end, Perez was number 10. Albon, I thought it was good to see him get the credit from his peers. This was the driver's driver of the year. Obviously, it's Verstappen, but, from Verstappen down is where it's actually more interesting, really. This, though, is the team principal's driver of the year. Now, the interesting part about this is they revealed on the website, unfortunately, they didn't reveal this for every driver, but they revealed how many points Verstappen got by the driver or by the team principals out of all that were possible. So the team principals put their favourite drivers or the drivers they thought were the best in order, and then based on the positions in that relative order, he was then, they got a total. Now, it turned out that Verstappen was basically P1 in 9 of the team principals rankings, but he was actually 3rd in one of the team principals rankings. So not everyone put him number 1. So I guess you got to wonder who put him 3rd. Which team principal might that potentially have been, but also exactly why, because my thinking is, okay, if Verstappen was 3rd in one team principal's rankings, that TP might have had both their drivers, number 1, number 2, possibly, is why that would be the case. But also, if you're putting Verstappen 3rd, maybe someone thought that Alonso was 1st or something, in which case maybe it's going to be, Mike Crack putting Stroll, Alonso, Verstappen, I don't know, just to get some more cash in from his boss or get the approval in from Lawrence Stroll, I don't know. Obviously, people would say, oh, it's got to be Toto, right? He hates Verstappen, but it's not really sure that's true. Not really sure I buy that, to be honest. So I guess, you can theorize what TP that might have been that put Verstappen 3rd, but everyone else had him 1st. However, the top 5 list is dramatically different. I've said before that I think you can probably justify the top 5 behind Verstappen in basically any order. I do think, though, I have Alonso, Hamilton 2nd and 3rd. I would think I would have had Hamilton 2nd, the driver's still on this one. But, it's obviously a matter of debate. And the drivers will see things differently as well from the team principals. The TPs they watch all the races from behind the scenes, so they have a different feeling of how the race has gone compared to, maybe they have higher expectations for a driver like Hamilton. I don't know. I think Norris 3rd is interesting because a lot of people are saying, hang on a second, how was Norris 3rd? He's had a good season for sure, but 4th from the driver's point of view, 3rd from the team principal's point of view, I think that's too high. I'd have had Hamilton above him. You can argue Leclerc above him as well. Norris had a good season for sure, but, he did throw away some opportunities, especially in qualifying towards the end of the season. Some people would say that the reason why the team principals are rating Norris highly is because they want him to join them, which honestly, there might be some truth to that. I don't know if you guys think that's a relevant factor, but we know that Horner and, obviously Toto Wolff also has to think about potential Hamilton replacements over the coming years. A lot of TPs are very keen on Norris. So maybe it makes sense why he might be voted a little higher. Now, also, Piastri and Albon appear on this list. Russell, though, is on the TPs list, which I thought was, it was strange to see him even outside of the top 10. I don't know if the drivers just don't like George or something, but I thought it was funny that George wasn't even in the top 10 drivers. Perez gets 10th, though, again. So I guess Gasly gets demoted down, which is maybe justifiable. And then Albon here was 8th from the team principal, specific to him was 7th from the drivers. So it's still kind of cool to see Albon Albon getting, I think the respect that he deserves up and down the grid from his peers and colleagues. But yeah, interesting differentials. But of course, there was only one winner for both of these awards this season. Now, Zhou Guanyu did not appear on either of those lists, totally understandably so. He did actually respond, though, to rumours going around that he's going to get dropped, which, to be honest, feels to me like a bit of an inevitability, right? I don't think that, Sauer will stick with Zhou forever. Solid driver. He's done reasonably well, I would say, against Bottas, but, he hasn't exactly set the world on fire, let's say. Now, he has been asked to comment, let's say. Now, he has been asked to comment on rumours that he's going to get kicked out relatively soon, and he says, he doesn't care about these crazy rumours, which usually the translation here is that he actually does kind of care about these, rumours going around. But yeah, who knows what the future is for Sauber. We've talked about Nico Hülkenberg, we've talked about Carlos Sainz potentially being possibilities in the near future, but we believe that they might stick with Bottas for the time being. Zhou, though, is another question, especially when you've got the likes of Ter Pourchaire, who really want their chance at a seat in that Sauber pipeline, so that might make sense as well. Quickly, on yesterday's news, so we talked about the fact that a Red Bull RB20 has reportedly, rumoured to be, failing its first crash test with its homologation attempts from the front part of the chassis with the FIA. Now, it turns out Red Bull aren't the only team that's failed it. Alpine have done so as well. Alpine also said to be waiting for the FIA's green light on this. So certain teams will, try and make major revisions to the chassis. They will try and get rid of all the weight they possibly can, and therefore they will take some risks with the crash tests. If the crash tests don't go to plan, okay, they add another layer of carbon on, and it's not the end of the world, but it still does, detract somewhat from the time they have to develop the car. But maybe you don't even want to pass the crash test on the first attempt because it means that you've actually had, too much weight on the car. Maybe the ideal world is to fail it the first time and then pass it the second time, because then you're right on the limit of the amount of weight that you absolutely need on the car. But the teams generally have a good idea what's going on here. But nonetheless, it's kind of interesting that apparently Red Bull and Alpine are the two squads that still need that to be confirmed, which may delay them very slightly, but probably not significantly so. And at the end of the day, Verstappen is odds-on favourite to win this year's championship again. This, I thought, was a crazy stat going around that Verstappen could have had, and this just kind of doubles down on how poor Perez was this year, really. But Verstappen could have had a 20-second time penalty after every Grand Prix and every sprint race, and would still have won the World Championship. Like, that is just the level of advantage that Verstappen had over his teammate and the, mastery of that car. But apparently, they can do even better. Red Bull even put this on their Instagram today. 2023 was a warm-up. 2024, we take over. So, this is true, then God help us, I suppose, in terms of having a competitive championship, because Red Bull are clearly not satisfied with where they are, which is the mark of an absolute dominant force team that they presently are. But Red Bull aren't coming out and saying, well, last year's car was great. If we can even get close to that in next year's car, fantastic. Red Bull believe, no, actually, last year's car, they talk about it like it's a tractor, won 21 of 22 races, but the way Verstappen and the guys at Red Bull talk about last year's car was if, it wasn't really that good, nothing special, it's just, only 95% of race wins we got. That's pathetic, come on, we've got to go for one more. And even Horner said that, didn't he, after Abu Dhabi or something? He was like, well, we missed one, I guess that's one more we can go for next year. So, if this comes true, of course, it's a scary sign. At the same time, Horner says, well, the other teams are going to catch up. Red Bull say that as well. And that should be the case to some degree. But clearly, the RB19 was not the ceiling of this development concept. Other teams as well believe they have improvements to find over even what Red Bull did last year. But of course, they're starting from a different starting point than where Red Bull are. So Verstappen commented on this and said that it's street circuit and low-speed corners and curbing. Those kind of things, I think we are not the best at the moment. Which is interesting because the Red Bull, it's incredibly hard to find a weakness with last year's RB19. You look at all corner types, all situations, all tracks, they will be competitive. Now, Singapore was an outlier, for sure. They didn't get the setup right that weekend, and it cost them significantly, the ride heights, this type of stuff. Everywhere else, though, they were great, and I think even Horner said that it was after Australia last year, once they'd gone through Bahrain, they'd gone through Jeddah, they'd gone through Australia, very different tracks in some ways, very different corner types. Then they realised, okay, we've got a rocket ship here because it was good in all of those situations. But Pierre Vacher of Red Bull also says that, yeah, Max is right on this. The team sees the same weaknesses, maybe a different perspective, but he more or less summarised it quite well. Low speed is clearly one area they've got to improve on. 90-degree corners are not the best, as you could see in quali in Baku. funny really, right, that they dominated the Baku race, the sprint and the race. Perez and Max were miles ahead. But sure, in quali, Leclerc pipped them by a fraction in that Ferrari that's pretty quick on the straight, and we know that Leclerc at Baku is a bit of a master. So they lose out in both quali sessions so marginally to Leclerc, and they're saying, 90-degree corners, not the best, different track type there. Of course, Singapore was also not great. He also says that our capacity to ride the curves and the bumpy tracks is also not perfect, and we have to improve this area. So I thought the statements of Red Bull, like just the way they talk about their car as if it's a tractor, I just find pretty funny. Especially when, sure, they might not be the absolute best car in every aspect, but I wouldn't, it doesn't seem to me that these are weaknesses, right? Like low speed corners, they might be a weakness for the Red Bull with respect to their high-speed corner performance, but they're not a weakness compared to the rest of the grid. The low-speed performance of the Red Bull is still probably the best of any car on average, and if it's not, then it's the second best. He also talked about 90-degree corners, where, they might be on par maybe with the McLaren, with the Ferrari, maybe even with the Mercedes in part, we'll discuss in a second. And then he also talked about riding the curbs and bumpy tracks not being perfect, which is interesting in the sense that we think that compared to most cars, the Red Bull is pretty damn good. I think other cars generally struggle more over the curbs, but clearly Red Bull believe that, well, the other teams might be struggling more, but that's not because we've done a perfect job, that's because they just did it worse than us, and we can get even better. So it seems to me that Verstappen is really after that Singapore Grand Prix victory. It's, I think, the only circuit now on the calendar, is it, apart from, I guess, China, which is coming back, that Max Verstappen hasn't won at. So, here is an opportunity, and Singapore has always, for various reasons, been a bogus circuit for him over the years. So the opportunity is there for him to try and win it this year. We know that it's been a trouble track for himself and for Red Bull for some time, and I guess if their plan is, all right, curbs, bumpy corners, slower 90-degree corners, that's where they've got to improve. That sounds like a recipe to try and fix their issues potentially at Singapore. So that's very interesting. The other thing to mention, though, is on that kind of lower speed performance indicators, because I think it is true that at Silverstone there was quite a lot of talk about this actually from Mercedes at the time, that during qualifying they could match the Red Bull pretty much up until Copse. Like the entire first part of the lap through Abbey, through, Farm, the loop, down the Wellington Straight, Brooklands, Luffield, and then round that part, the old pit straight and all this, they were basically on par with Red Bull during that course of the track. But when the two respective cars got through Copse, the higher speed stuff, Maggots, Beckett's, Chapel, and then down the Hanger Straight, that's when, Snow and all this stuff, that's where they would lose out to the Red Bull, basically, because the high speed performance wasn't as good and their straight line speed performance wasn't as good. But in the lower speed stuff, in the first couple of sectors, the Mercedes was basically on par with the Red Bull after the respective updates they brought. But it was the straight line speed stuff and the high speed where they really, fell short. And the other teams are in a pretty similar boat. So, fair enough. Red Bull, compared to Mercedes, let's say, are weaker in the slower speed corners than they are in the higher speed corners. Does that mean they're worse than any team in those respective corner types? No, but they're not as much better in the lower speed and over the curbs and these things than they are in the other parts, which is, it is a scary sign in the sense that Red Bull are not happy to just sit here and say, well, our car was the best in 90% of aspects, but it was the worst, not the worst, it was second best maybe in 10% of aspects, but they want to be the best in 100% of aspects. And clearly they're looking at circuits such as Singapore and thinking, okay, how do we make sure we win there next year? Because, if they can win at Singapore next year, then they can certainly win at every track next year, which at the end of the day is their goal, as scary as that sounds for the respective competitions. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comment section below. We'll see, of course, whether they can actually achieve this. It's one thing to say, we're going to work on this, we're going to work on that. Those are the key aims for next year's car. It's another thing to do it, but of course, do we not trust Newey and Vacher and the guys over there to deliver the goods on that? Obviously you've got to believe that they know what they're doing at this point, especially after the cars they've made for the last couple of years. Newey also commented on 2026, the active aerodynamics. Of course, Newey even worked on this back in the early part of his career and says that basically they're going to be used, these active aero ideas, for road cars, so he's not opposed to bringing them into Formula 1. Doesn't mean that Newey and Red Bull are necessarily fully on board with the entirety of the 2026 regulations. We know that they have had their frustrations over the lacking ICE engine power, the prevalence of the battery in that power unit. and questions that raises on how confident Red Bull are in delivering a good battery come 2026. But yeah, Newey says the active aero becomes essential to make up for the power unit that's lacking in energy, but I don't think that's a bad thing at all. So Newey is, looking forward to cooking something up for 2026, and more than likely it's going to be tough to beat them until that point. Speaking of Verstappen, before we close out the video, you guys might have seen this going around. So Verstappen tried to hire a car from Sixt, right, a car rental firm, and was denied it for being too young to drive this car, which I just find hilarious. Now, the ironic part about this is that the car that he was trying to hire was a Mercedes AMG GT that he was turned down for. So kind of crazy really to think how things work around. Now, I think the story behind this is that Sixt have a policy in place for this particular car that you've got to be 30 to drive it. Many car hire companies do this when, if you're 18, 17, good luck, right? No chance. You've got to be, usually it's like 25, I think. But for this car, because it's a special car, whatever, they had to be, the rule is you've got to be 30 to drive it. Now, it turns out that there should have been a way here for them to make an exception, given the fact that this is Max Verstappen, the back-to-back-to-back World Drivers' Champion, and probably the best driver, even all-round driver on the planet at the moment, given his success in other disciplines as well. To such an extent, actually, that they then apologized to Verstappen and said, we apologize to Mr. Verstappen. He can rent the car he wants from us at any time. There is, of course, no doubt at all about his driving skills and his experience with powerful cars, but clearly the team on duty at the time were either not aware of Max Verstappen or they were not aware that they could make an exception in this case. So unfortunately, Max had to go. Maybe he got a BMW or something. He said, I don't know. He got some alternative car, but Sixt now saying, oh, please come back, Mr. Verstappen. We apologize, effectively implying that he was not skilled enough to drive it. But very much interested to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.